I didn't come across the officer's name the way most people do. There was no headline, no press release, no official notice beyond a single line in a staffing update that said the position had been left vacant. Bridge Patrol, Key West Sector. No reason given, just blank space where a name used to be. The records start normal enough. That's what makes them hard to stop reading once they turn. The shift reports are typed, dated, signed. Tide conditions noted. Mile markers checked off in neat columns. Patrol lights tested at the start of every night. Everything exactly where it should be. And then, without warning, the language changes. Not dramatically. Not at first. Just enough to make you reread a sentence twice. Before I go any further, if you're listening to this now, make sure you're subscribed. These records weren't meant to be found all at once, and I'll be going through them slowly. And if you're watching from somewhere near water, or somewhere far from it, leave a comment and say where you're listening from. That detail may matter more than it should. The officer went missing 3 weeks after the final report was filed. That much is confirmed. His vehicle was found parked at the midpoint of the bridge, angled slightly toward the guardrail. Patrol lights off. Engine cold. Radio still mounted. Volume turned down low enough that someone standing a few feet away might not hear it. There were no signs of a struggle. No damaged equipment. No witnesses. Just absence. The first document I read was a written statement he submitted voluntarily. It wasn't requested. There's no reference number attached to it. No supervisor's signature acknowledging receipt. It appears to have been slid into the system quietly, like something the officer wasn't sure he was allowed to submit, but felt he had to anyway. The statement begins by clarifying that everything written after the first paragraph may be inaccurate. He underlined the word inaccurate once, then crossed it out and wrote not real. Real. Not real. In the margin, small and careful, he starts by listing bridge elements. Mile. Marker 12. Southbound shoulder. Maintenance ladder beneath the third support column. Patrol light cycle operating on backup timing due to salt exposure. These details repeat throughout the documents, sometimes word for word, sometimes rearranged, as if the act of naming them mattered, as if the bridge itself needed to be reaffirmed each time. The officer notes the water below as unusually calm for the hour. No wind shear. No surface chop. He writes that this should not have been possible given the tide chart attached, which he also included and highlighted in yellow. The highlight bleeds through the page. On the scanned copy, it looks like a bruise. The audio file was found later. It wasn't logged with the rest of the materials. It was stored under maintenance, mislabeled, time-stamped hours after the written statement, but before the officer's final shift officially ended. The recording begins mid-thought. There's no greeting, no badge number, no formal opening. Just a voice that sounds like it's already been speaking for a long time. What's strange is not what he says, but what he corrects. He keeps stopping himself, revising simple observations. The water is moving. The water is not moving. The water looks closer than it should. The bridge height has not changed. The bridge height has not changed. He repeats that last line 3 times, each quieter than the last. There is a moment in the audio where he mentions the maintenance ladder again. He says he checked it twice, once at the beginning of the shift, once after noticing moisture on the lower rungs. Moisture is his word, not water. He does not explain the difference. He only says the rungs were wet in a way that didn't match the tide line marked on the concrete. In the written statement, he insists he never saw anything clearly. That sentence appears 4 times. Each version is slightly different. I never saw it clearly. I didn't see it clearly. I didn't see anything clearly. I didn't see anything. Only the last one is not crossed out. There are procedural contradictions. He marks himself as remaining inside the vehicle, while also noting that his boots were soaked. He records a radio check that never appears in dispatch logs. He references a call sign that hasn't been used in this sector for years. These are the kinds of errors you might expect from fatigue, except his shift hours show no overtime, no doubles, no missed rest periods. The officer mentions sound only once. He says there was none. Then he adds a sentence beneath it, written smaller, pressed hard enough to tear the page. Too quiet is still a sound. That sentence does not appear anywhere else. What unsettles me most is how often he reassures the record. Not a supervisor, not a future reader, the record itself. This is a bridge. This is a patrol. This is water. This is night. These phrases repeat, sometimes stacked together, sometimes broken apart by mile numbers and timestamps. It reads less like documentation and more like orientation, as if he was afraid something present might forget where it was. The final paragraph of the written statement is incomplete. It ends with a description of the bridge support columns disappearing into the water, the way they always have. He writes that the water line looked wrong against the concrete. Then the sentence stops. There is no period, no signature beneath it. Just an indentation where his name should be. After the officer was reported missing, the bridge remained open. Traffic continued. Maintenance crews were sent to inspect the ladder mentioned in the report. They found nothing unusual. No residue, no damage, no indication that anyone had climbed from below. Officially, there was no incident. Unofficially, the patrol schedule was changed. Officers were instructed not to stop at the midpoint unless absolutely necessary. The maintenance ladder was removed. The tide charts were updated more frequently than required. None of these changes were documented as responses to the officer's disappearance. They were framed as routine improvements. I've listened to the audio file more times than I can count. There's a section near the end where the officer stops correcting himself. His voice steadies. He says that whatever he thought he saw is no longer the important part. He says the important part is that it knew where the bridge was before he did. That line appears nowhere in the written statement. It doesn't appear in any follow-up documentation either. The recording cuts off without warning. There's no closing remark. No sound to mark the end, just absence, the same way the officer himself disappears from the paperwork after that night. No transfer record, no resignation letter, no death certificate, just a gap where the reports should continue. Not real, real, not real. That phrase appears one last time, written on the back of the printed tide chart. It's lighter there, as if the pen was running out of ink or the writer's hand had begun to shake, or perhaps he was trying not to press too hard, afraid that writing it down again might make it stay. I don't know why these records were kept the way they were. I don't know who decided not to release them. I only know that the bridge is still there, stretching low and quiet over the water, and that no one has officially replaced the officer assigned to that stretch of night. The documents end, but the patrol route does not. The first night assigned to that stretch of bridge is always written about in training materials as uneventful. That word comes up more than once. Uneventful. Predictable. A place meant to teach patience, not vigilance. The water is supposed to be the only thing that moves, and even that movement follows charts, schedules, expectations. According to the personnel file, the officer had been on bridge patrol for just under 8 months when the written statement was submitted. No disciplinary actions, no commendations, no requests for transfer. His evaluations describe him as quiet, detail-oriented, unlikely to exaggerate. One supervisor noted that his reports were longer than necessary, but consistently accurate. Another wrote that he had a habit of double-checking physical markers during his shift, especially mile signs and maintenance access points. The first patrol log from the week in question looks like every other. Start time recorded to the minute. Weather conditions consistent with forecast. Visibility listed as clear. Tide chart attached and referenced by number. There's a line that notes the patrol lights cycling normally, though the officer adds a parenthetical observation that the third light from the southern end flickered briefly before stabilizing. This detail does not appear in any maintenance request. He begins to mention the water more frequently after that night. Not in dramatic terms, just repetition. Calm surface. No debris. No vessel lights. The absence of boats is noted twice on the same page, once at the beginning of the shift and once near the end, as if the lack itself required confirmation. On the second night, he records stopping at mile marker 12 longer than protocol suggests. He explains the delay by citing a routine inspection of the guard rail bolts. There is no indication that any issue was found, but he lists each bolt anyway, counting them out in writing. 16 fasteners. All intact, no corrosion beyond expected levels. He adds that the metal felt colder than the surrounding air, though the temperature reading does not support that impression. The logs remain procedural, but the margins begin to fill. Small notes, almost annotations to himself. Check ladder again. Listen longer. Water level wrong for hour. Each note is written smaller than the last, tucked between printed lines that were never meant to hold additional information. There is an audio file corresponding to that second night as well, though it was not initially associated with the patrol log. It appears to have been recorded accidentally, possibly when the officer tested his radio mic and forgot to disengage the recording function. The file contains long stretches of silence. No traffic, no dispatch calls, just the faint sound of wind and something else beneath it, indistinct enough that it could be dismissed if you weren't already listening for it. At one point, the officer speaks under his breath. Not into the radio. Not formally. He says the ladder wasn't wet earlier. The sentence hangs there, unfinished. After several seconds, he adds, "It's not supposed to be reachable." There is no explanation attached to that statement. He does not specify what he believes might reach it. By the third night, the patrol logs show correct words crossed out and replaced with synonyms that don't quite match. Calm becomes still. Still becomes stopped. In one place, he replaces water with surface and then draws a line through it entirely, leaving the space blank. The omission is more noticeable than the word ever would have been. The officer notes checking the maintenance ladder again. This time he includes a rough sketch, drawn in the margin. It's not detailed, just vertical lines for the rungs and a shaded area beneath them. The shading is labeled low tide, with an arrow pointing upward and the word higher written twice above it. He does not include a measurement. A separate document from that week shows he requested access to older bridge inspection records, going back more than a decade. There is no stated reason. The request was approved automatically, as most are. What he found there is not recorded, but after that request, references to previous incidents begin appearing in his patrol notes. Vague mentions. An accident years ago. A temporary closure for repairs. A missing contractor, name partially obscured by a coffee stain on the scanned page. He writes that the water reflects the lights incorrectly. That sentence is circled. Then the circle is crossed out. He writes beneath it that reflections are not reliable points of reference at night. This reads less like a report and more like a reminder. A rule repeated to keep something in place. There is a moment in the audio from the fourth night where he laughs softly. It's brief, almost embarrassed. He says he's tired. He says night work makes you see patterns where there aren't any. Then he stops laughing and says, "But patterns still exist even when you're tired." The way he says it suggests he's not entirely convinced by his own reassurance. Dispatch records show no unusual calls during these shifts. No reports of trespassers. No vessel distress signals. No wildlife incidents. The bridge, on paper, remains quiet. But the officer's logs begin to show time gaps. 15 minutes unaccounted for. 20 minutes where no observations are recorded at all. When the logs resume, the handwriting is tighter, more controlled, as if effort was required to steady it. He starts listing the same bridge elements in the same order at the beginning of each shift, even though the form does not require it. Mile marker, guardrail, ladder, support column, waterline. The repetition is exact, word for word, as if deviation might cause something to slip. In one margin, barely visible, he writes, "Not real," then crosses it out. Writes, "Real." Crosses that out too. Leaves the space empty after. The maintenance ladder is removed from his sketches after that. He still mentions it in writing, but he no longer draws it. Instead, he draws the space where it should be. A blank vertical gap beneath the bridge, labeled access point. The label is underlined twice. On the 5th night, the audio file captures his breathing. It's steady at first. Then it changes, subtle enough that you might miss it if you weren't listening closely. He is standing still for a long time. He does not speak. When he finally does, he says the water is too close to the underside of the bridge. He checks the tide chart aloud, reads the numbers, confirms they don't match what he's seeing. Then he stops reading and goes quiet again. The patrol log from that night ends early. There is no explanation. The next day's log begins as usual, but the officer adds a note at the top. He writes that he will remain inside the vehicle unless necessary. The handwriting suggests this decision was important. Necessary is underlined. This is where the records start to feel less like documentation and more like containment, as if the act of writing was meant to hold something in place, to keep the bridge behaving the way it was supposed to. The officer does not describe fear. He does not describe danger. He describes discrepancy. By the end of the week, the language has narrowed. Fewer adjectives, shorter sentences. He writes only what he can verify, and even then, he questions it. The water is present. The bridge is intact. The ladder exists, or existed. The uncertainty creeps in not through imagination, but through subtraction. The officer is still on duty at this point, still clocking in, still following procedure. On paper, nothing has gone wrong yet. But the spaces between the lines are getting wider, and the silence in the audio files longer. Something is being avoided, carefully, deliberately. Not named, not approached directly, as if looking at it straight on would make it impossible to step back. The records do not explain why he kept returning to the midpoint of the bridge. They only show that he did. The midpoint of the bridge becomes a fixed point in the records after that. Not officially. There is no directive instructing him to linger there. But the timestamps tell their own story. Each night, no matter how the rest of the patrol shifts, there is a pause at mile marker 12. Sometimes it lasts 5 minutes. Sometimes 20. Once, nearly 40. The officer never explains why. In the written logs, he begins to describe the act of stopping without describing what prompted it. Vehicle position parallel to guardrail. Engine left running. Headlights off. Patrol lights disabled manually. This last detail is unusual. Patrol lights are meant to remain active at all times during a stop, both for visibility and safety. He does not mark this as a deviation. He writes it as a choice. The audio files from these stops are different from the earlier ones. There is less ambient noise. No passing traffic. No wind. It is difficult to tell whether this is because of the recording quality or because the environment itself had changed. The officer does not comment on the quiet directly, but he begins to clear his throat often. A small sound repeated at regular intervals, as if he is checking that sound still behaves the way it should. On the 6th night, he speaks into the recorder with a formality that feels forced. He states the date, the time, his location. He confirms that the bridge structure appears intact. He confirms that the water level is inconsistent with the tide chart, but does not speculate as to why. He pauses, then adds that the maintenance ladder is no longer visible from his position. He does not clarify whether this means it has been removed or obscured. In the margin of the corresponding written log, he writes the word obscured and circles it. Then he draws an arrow pointing downward and writes from below. This addition is later crossed out with such force that the pen tears the paper. There is a moment in the audio where he leans out of the vehicle. You can tell by the shift in sound, the faint creak of the door hinge. He does not step fully out. He remains half inside, half out, suspended in a way that mirrors the bridge itself. He says that the water smells different tonight. Not stronger, not fouler, just wrong. He repeats that word twice, quieter the second time. The officer begins referring to the underside of the bridge as if it were a space that can be occupied. He does not say by what. He says beneath the deck, the air feels thicker. He says the concrete looks darker where it meets the water, as if it has been wet longer than it should have been. He runs his flashlight along the support columns, but stops short of shining it directly down. In the written statement submitted later, he explains this omission. He writes that light changes things. He does not elaborate. He underlines the sentence once, then twice, then leaves it alone. The seventh night is the first time the officer records a physical reaction. His handwriting shows signs of tremor. Not dramatic, just enough that the letters lean slightly to the right. He notes that his hands felt unsteady after gripping the guardrail. He adds that the metal was damp again, though there had been no rain and no spray from passing boats. He wipes his hand on his uniform and writes that the fabric absorbed moisture unevenly. There is a short audio clip from this night that ends abruptly. In it he says, "It's closer now," and then stops. No explanation of what closer refers to. No follow-up. The file ends mid-breath. By the eighth night, he stops using full sentences altogether in some sections of the log. Bullet points replace narrative. Waterline higher. Ladder wet. Silence extended. He writes these points as if listing inventory, but there is no column to place them in. They sit alone on the page, unanchored. Dispatch contacts him twice during that shift. Both times he responds normally. His voice sounds calm, professional. There is no trace of the tension that appears in the private recordings. After the second call, he mutters something that does not go through the radio. It's barely audible, but when isolated, it sounds like he's repeating a sequence of words under his breath. Not real, real, not real. He begins checking the ladder before and after each stop. This is noted repeatedly. Ladder dry at start. Ladder wet later. Ladder unchanged in position. Ladder unchanged in position. The repetition suggests reassurance rather than observation. He does not record seeing water drip from above or below. He simply notes the condition and moves on. On the ninth night, the officer brings a measuring tape. This is not standard equipment for patrol. He measures the distance between the waterline and the lowest rung of the ladder. He writes the number down, then scratches it out. He measures again, writes a different number, scratches that out too. In the margin, he writes, "Keeps changing when I look away." There is no audio from that measurement. The recorder is silent for nearly an hour. When it resumes, his voice sounds distant, as if he is speaking from farther away than the microphone should allow. He says he does not think the bridge has moved. He says this carefully, choosing each word. He says he thinks the water is the variable. The 10th night is the last one with a complete patrol log. It is also the first time he writes about climbing. The word appears once, in reference to something that should not be able to do so. He does not specify what. He writes the sentence, then draws a line through it. The crossed-out words are still legible beneath the ink. Able to climb up from the water. He replaces the sentence with something more neutral. movement observed beneath structure. He signs the log beneath it, his name written more slowly than before. The audio from that night is longer than any previous recording. He speaks intermittently, sometimes narrating his actions, sometimes falling silent for long stretches. At one point, he describes hearing a sound that is not a splash. He does not attempt to imitate it. He says only that it reminded him of pressure being released. Near the end of the recording, he addresses the bridge directly. He tells it that he is still here, that he has not left, that he is following procedure. His voice remains steady, but there is an edge to it now, a careful restraint, as if he is afraid that speaking too loudly might prompt a response. The patrol log ends at the usual time. He clocks out. There is no indication that this night was different from the others. The next shift is scheduled as normal. There is no patrol log for that next shift. Instead, there is only the written statement, submitted later, and the audio file that does not end cleanly. Whatever happened after the 10th night did not make it into the official system. It exists only in fragments, in omissions, in the way the records stop aligning. The midpoint of the bridge remains unremarkable on inspection. The latter, when checked later, shows no damage. The water behaves according to charts again. On paper, the anomaly resolves itself. But the officer does not return. The absence of a patrol log is not, by itself, unusual. Files go missing. Shifts are reassigned. Data gets misfiled under the wrong date, or archived without explanation. What makes this gap different is how thoroughly everything around it remains intact. The schedules before and after are preserved. The bridge inspection reports continue uninterrupted. Dispatch logs show no anomalies. It is only the officer's presence that disappears. The first indication that something had gone wrong comes from a maintenance request filed 2 days after his final recorded shift. The request is routine in tone, flagged as low priority. It asks for an inspection of the underside of the bridge near mile marker 12, citing unusual moisture patterns along the support columns. The request does not reference the officer by name. It does not mention his disappearance. It reads as if the bridge itself had raised a concern. The inspection was carried out during daylight hours. The report states that visibility was clear and conditions were normal. No structural issues found. No biological interference observed. That phrase appears once, almost as an afterthought. Biological interference. It is not defined. It is not expanded upon. The inspector signs off, and the file is closed. There is, however, an attachment that does not belong. A single photograph, slightly out of focus, taken from below the bridge. The image shows one of the support columns and the water line beneath it. The water appears calm. The concrete appears dark. There is nothing obviously wrong. And yet, the photograph was printed, scanned, and included with the report, suggesting that someone felt it mattered. In the corner of the image, barely visible, there is a mark on the concrete that does not match the surrounding texture. It is vertical, elongated, darker than the rest of the surface. It could be staining. It could be shadow. The report does not mention it. The officer's logs would have. When the officer is officially marked as missing, the language used is careful. He failed to report for duty. His vehicle was found. No evidence of foul play. The bridge patrol position is listed as temporarily unassigned. There is no press inquiry noted in the records I accessed. If there was public concern, it does not appear here. What does appear is a series of internal emails discussing coverage adjustments. One supervisor suggests reducing stops at the midpoint unless necessary. Another mentions that extended stationary patrols over open water can increase fatigue. A third replies with a single sentence, agreed. Let's limit exposure. Exposure to what is never specified. The audio file labeled maintenance continues to draw attention. After the officer's disappearance, it was accessed 3 times by different users. Each access is logged. Each user listens for less than 5 minutes. None of them leave comments. The file remains where it is, mislabeled, untouched otherwise. I listened to it again after reading the maintenance inspection. There is a section I had overlooked before, buried beneath the officer's breathing and the low ambient hum. He says something about the support columns. He says they are closer together than they should be. He corrects himself immediately. He says his depth perception is off at night. He says bridges don't move. There is a pause after that. Then he says, but access points do. This line does not appear in the written statement. As I went back through the older bridge records, I found references to previous incidents that had been summarized into bland phrases. Temporary closure due to maintenance. Delay caused by environmental factors. Unscheduled inspection. In one case, a night shift contractor is listed as having resigned abruptly after less than a month on the job. No reason given. His file contains a note about refusing to work beneath the bridge after dark. There are no missing person reports attached to these older files. If anyone disappeared before, it was either not recorded or recorded elsewhere. The bridge, as an object of infrastructure, accumulates history in fragments. Only what is necessary to keep it standing remains clearly documented. The officer's written statement includes a paragraph that appears to have been revised several times. The ink density changes mid-sentence. He writes that he believes the bridge attracts attention. He crosses that out. He writes that attention gathers beneath it. Crosses that out too. The final version reads simply, the bridge is not empty at night. He does not say occupied. He does not say inhabited. He chooses empty, then negates it. There is a contradiction that appears more frequently as the records progress. The officer insists that he never saw anything clearly, while also documenting specific details that suggest prolonged observation. Wet rungs. Shifting measurements. The smell of the water. The way the concrete looks when light hits it at certain angles. These are not the notes of someone who glanced and moved on. These are the notes of someone who stayed. In the days following his disappearance, tide charts from that week are reviewed by a supervisor. There is a note in the margin questioning whether the readings might have been misaligned. The charts are reissued. The new versions match expectations. The older ones are marked superseded. The discrepancy resolves itself on paper. The bridge remains open. Traffic flows. Tourists cross without incident. During the day, the underside looks ordinary. Maintenance crews report nothing unusual. The ladder, removed after the officer's disappearance, is listed as decommissioned due to corrosion. There is no record of who authorized its removal. What lingers are the small inconsistencies that never quite line up, the moisture patterns that appear and disappear, the photograph that captures nothing and yet refuses to be discarded, the audio file that no one listens to in full. I begin to understand why the officer wrote the way he did, why he listed the same elements over and over. Mile marker. Ladder. Waterline. He was anchoring himself. Establishing reference points in a space that refused to stay consistent. Not real. Real. Not real. The phrase appears again, this time in an email draft saved but never sent. The officer typed it into the subject line and nothing else. There is no recipient listed. The timestamp places it hours before his final shift. Whatever he believed was happening beneath the bridge, he believed it required witnesses. Records. Documentation. Proof that could survive, even if he did not. The tragedy, if it can be called that, is that the system absorbed his evidence and smoothed it flat, filing it down until only faint impressions remained. The bridge still stands. The water still moves according to charts. And somewhere between those two things, a gap exists where a person used to be. After the officer was marked missing, the bridge patrol schedule was rewritten without ceremony. Names shifted. gaps closed. The midpoint stop was quietly removed from the standard route description, replaced with a vague instruction to monitor traffic flow as conditions require. No one questioned the change. Or if they did, it wasn't recorded. What did continue, briefly, were the reports of moisture. They came from maintenance crews at first. Notes buried in inspection summaries. Dampness along the lower portions of the support columns despite clear weather. A persistent slickness on concrete surfaces that should have dried within hours of sunrise. Each report included a qualifier. Likely condensation. Likely residual spray. Likely harmless. The word likely does a lot of work in those documents. One inspector mentions that the stains appear higher than the tide line, but adds that he may be misjudging due to light conditions. Another writes that the smell beneath the bridge is stronger than expected for that time of year. He attributes it to algae bloom. No sample is taken. The audio file is accessed again during this period, this time by someone in facilities management. They listen for just over 2 minutes. The log shows no follow-up. No report filed. No comment added. It's as if the sound itself was enough to convince them not to pursue it further. I noticed something else when reviewing the officer's final written statement more closely. The phrasing shifts near the end. Early sections rely on observation. Later ones lean toward instruction. Do not remain stationary too long. Avoid looking directly beneath the deck. Trust the charts, but verify physically. These lines are written as if for someone else, not himself. There is a sentence near the bottom of the page that appears to have been added later, squeezed into a space that barely fits it. He writes that attention seems to matter, that prolonged observation may encourage proximity. He underlines proximity once, then scratches the underline out. The word remains. During the week after his disappearance, dispatch receives 2 calls from motorists reporting something on the bridge. Both callers describe it differently. One says it sounded like scraping. The other says it felt like the car passed through a pocket of colder air. Neither report results in an incident log. Both are categorized as environmental noise. What does get logged is a brief radio malfunction during a night shift. Static interference lasting several seconds. The recording of that transmission contains a faint echo beneath the noise, almost like breathing. The technician who reviews it marks it as artifact and clears the channel. The bridge is inspected again at night, this time with floodlights. The report notes that illumination conditions alter perception of depth and distance beneath the structure. It recommends minimizing unnecessary lighting changes to avoid confusion. No one explains who might be confused. There is a missing page in the officer's personnel file. It should contain a routine psychological evaluation completed months earlier. The index lists it. The page itself is gone. In its place is a scanned note that reads, "File relocated. No destination is given." I find another audio clip, unlabeled, saved to the same directory as the maintenance recording. The timestamp places it late at night, but not on any shift he was scheduled for. The officer's voice is present, though quieter than before. He sounds as if he is trying not to be heard. He says he understands now why it stays low, why it waits. He says bridges create habits, traffic patterns, patrol routines, light cycles. He says anything that learns those patterns doesn't need to rush. It knows when someone will stop. There is a long silence after that. Then he says something I have trouble reconciling with the rest of the records. He says it doesn't come up all at once. He says it adjusts, tests, finds the places where the structure gives just enough. He does not say how he knows this. He says it like a conclusion reached slowly, over many nights. The clip ends without warning, just like the others. From that point on, references to the underside of the bridge disappear from official documents. Maintenance focuses on the roadway. Patrols keep moving. The water becomes background again, something passed over rather than examined. Whatever attention had gathered there dissipates, or at least appears to. But the absence left by the officer does not close. His name remains in older logs. His handwriting persists in margins and corrections. His phrasing echoes in the way later reports avoid certain words. No one writes beneath the bridge anymore. They write near it, around it. There is a final contradiction that I can't resolve. The officer insists, repeatedly, that he never saw anything clearly, and yet he documents behavior, movement, adjustment, learning. These are not qualities inferred from a single glimpse. They require time, patience, watching. The bridge patrol position is eventually filled again, but the assignment rotates more frequently now. No one stays long. The midpoint remains just another stretch of road on paper. In practice, vehicles slow there anyway, as if drivers feel something they can't quite name. The water beneath continues to rise and fall according to the charts. Most nights it behaves exactly as expected. Most nights. The records don't say what happened to the officer after his last shift. They don't say where he went, or whether he went willingly. They only show where he stopped. Not real. Real. Not real. The phrase appears one final time, scrawled faintly on the back of a photocopied inspection report. No one claims responsibility for writing it. The ink matches no known pen in the file. Whatever was learned during those nights on the bridge did not vanish with the officer. It settled into the documentation, into the habits and omissions that followed. A shape defined not by what is present, but by what is no longer allowed to be noticed. The decision to review the bridge records one last time came after noticing a pattern that hadn't been obvious before. It wasn't in what was written. It was in when it was written. Nearly every deviation, every margin note, every correction the officer made occurred during the same window of time each night. Not the same hour exactly, but the same phase of the patrol. The point after traffic thinned, after the lights settled into their repeating rhythm, after the bridge became what it was meant to be when no one was crossing it. The bridge inspection schedules changed subtly after his disappearance. Night inspections were reduced. When they did occur, they were completed quickly. Inspectors avoided lingering beneath the deck. One report includes a recommendation to limit time spent under the structure due to discomfort caused by acoustics. The word discomfort is circled by someone else, a different hand, and replaced with impractical. The officer's final written statement contains a section that was never digitized properly. The scan cuts off the bottom of the page, leaving only the tops of several lines visible. I requested the physical copy. What remains is faint, the ink partially smeared as if exposed to moisture long after it was written. He writes that the bridge teaches patience, that it rewards stillness. He writes that anything beneath it long enough begins to understand when the lights change, and when the patrol vehicle slows. He adds that height is not always a barrier. Sometimes, it is an invitation. The handwriting grows uneven here. The words tilt downward as if pulled. He writes that the underside is not as far away as it looks. He corrects himself. He writes that distance behaves differently at night, that surfaces meet when you're not watching. There is an audio clip that corresponds roughly to this portion of the statement, though the timestamps don't align cleanly. In it, the officer is standing still. He is not inside the vehicle. You can tell by the openness of the sound, the way his breathing carries. He says he can feel the vibration of the bridge through his boots. He says it feels like something shifting its weight. He pauses, then adds that bridges are meant to hold weight. That is their purpose. He repeats this twice, slower the second time, as if testing the words. The audio captures a moment where he steps closer to the guardrail. There is a faint metallic sound as his hand rests against it. He does not look down. He says that looking down changes the angle. He says that once you see how close it really is, it becomes difficult to remember the distance you thought existed before. This is the first time he uses the word waiting. He says it is waiting the way tides wait, the way schedules wait, the way routines wait to be followed. He does not say what is waiting. He says it as if the concept itself is sufficient. The maintenance photograph becomes clearer in this context. The dark mark on the support column no longer looks like random staining. It looks like repeated contact, a place where something has pressed often enough to leave an impression. The report never addresses it, but the officer's notes suggest he noticed similar marks on other columns. Higher each time. There is a contradiction in his statement that I keep returning to. He insists that he never saw anything climb, and yet he writes that the marks did not appear all at once. He writes that they progressed, that whatever caused them did not rush. It learned where to place itself, where the structure allowed it. The final audio file, the one that cuts off abruptly, begins with him reciting bridge elements again. Mile marker. Ladder. Support column. Waterline. His voice is steady, almost calm. He sounds like someone preparing for something inevitable rather than unexpected. He says that the ladder was never the access point, that it was a distraction, something easy to blame. He says the real access is the habit of stopping, the way patrol vehicles pause at the same place each night, the way attention pools there, the way water does. There is a moment where he stops speaking and listens. The silence stretches longer than before. When he speaks again, his voice is quieter. He says it's closer than it was last night. He says he can feel it in the vibration now, not just see it in the waterline. He does not sound afraid. He sounds resigned. The officer says he understands now why it doesn't climb all at once, why it takes time, why it needs someone to notice the difference between where the water should be and where it actually is. He says noticing is the invitation. The bridge doesn't stop it. It shows it how. The audio cuts off as he inhales, as if about to say something else. There is no indication of what happened next. No sound of movement, no impact. Just an abrupt end, like a thought interrupted. After that night, the bridge behaves. Inspections report normal conditions. Moisture patterns fade. The smell dissipates. The water returns to its expected levels. Whatever adjustment occurred appears complete. But the patrol logs never return to their previous detail. Even now, entries remain sparse. Observations minimal. No one lingers at the midpoint. The bridge is crossed, not watched. The officer's disappearance is eventually marked unresolved. The file is closed without conclusion. His name remains in the system, attached to the records he left behind, a presence defined entirely by what follows it. Not real. Real. Not real. The phrase feels less like doubt now and more like a warning, a reminder that certainty invites proximity. That attention narrows distance. The bridge still stands over the water. The space beneath it remains unremarkable to anyone who does not stop long enough to measure it. There is no official account of the final night, no report filed, no incident number assigned. What exists instead is an absence so complete that it feels intentional, as if the system itself learned what not to record. The officer's vehicle was found exactly where the earlier logs suggested it would be. Midpoint. Southbound shoulder, parallel to the guardrail. The tires were still warm when it was discovered, though the engine had been off long enough for the metal to cool. Patrol lights were disabled. Headlights off. The keys were still in the ignition. Inside the vehicle, nothing appeared disturbed. His radio was docked. His notebook sat on the passenger seat, open to a blank page. The pen lay across it, uncapped, as if he had been about to write something and then decided against it. Or been interrupted. There were no footprints leading away from the vehicle, no signs of a struggle. The guardrail showed no damage. The surface of the bridge was dry. Below, the water moved according to the charts. What stands out in the recovery notes is a single line added at the end. handwritten rather than typed. The responding officer wrote that the underside of the bridge could not be clearly seen from their position. No further explanation is given. The note is initialed but not dated. The officer's personal effects were catalogued and returned to storage. Wallet. Phone. Badge. The phone shows no outgoing calls or messages after he parked the vehicle. No drafts. No unsent texts. It is as if the device, like the notebook, was left unused at the moment it mattered most. The audio recorder was still active. This detail is easy to miss, buried among inventory lists and timestamps. The recorder did not shut off when the previous file ended. It continued running, capturing silence for an indeterminate length of time until the battery finally died. That silence was never reviewed in full. The file is too large, too empty. It was marked corrupted and archived. I accessed it anyway. There is nothing obvious in the recording. No sudden noise. No voices. No movement. Just the faint, constant presence of the environment. Wind. Distant water. The low hum of the bridge itself. But after listening for a long time, longer than most people would tolerate, subtle variations begin to emerge. Not sounds exactly. Changes in pressure. In rhythm, as if something is adjusting just beyond the range of clarity. At one point, far into the recording, there is a brief interruption in the ambient noise. A moment where the background seems to hold its breath. It lasts less than a second. Then, everything resumes as before. The officer's final written statement ends with a sentence fragment that was never completed. I believe now that the blank page in his notebook was meant to continue it. That whatever he intended to write required proximity, required being there, at the midpoint, with the bridge and the water behaving the way they do at night. The investigation concludes quietly. Leads dry up. The case file is moved to an active status. The bridge patrol assignment continues, altered but unacknowledged. The midpoint remains a place vehicles pass without stopping. Over time, references to the officer become harder to find. His name is removed from schedules. His personnel file is condensed. Eventually, even the vacancy notice disappears, replaced by a new name. Then another. No one stays long. The bridge, however, does not forget. There are still reports, occasionally, of moisture where there shouldn't be any. Of sounds that don't match traffic or tide. Of a sense that the distance between the roadway and the water is smaller than it appears. These reports are dismissed. They always are. What remains are the habits the officer documented. The way attention gathers when something is watched too closely. The way structures shape behavior. The way repetition creates access. Not real. Real. Not real. The phrase feels incomplete now, like something missing between the words. A step not written down. A moment left undocumented. The bridge stands low over the water, its support columns disappearing into the dark. At night, when traffic thins and the lights settle into their cycle, the space beneath it becomes very quiet. Quiet enough that someone might be tempted to stop. To listen. To measure the distance for themselves. The records do not say what happens if they do. They end where the officer did. Mid-thought, there is nothing left in the official system to review after that point. No addendum. No late discovery. No quiet correction filed years later that changes the shape of what happened. The records end the way they end, and everything that follows exists outside of them. I tried to find the bridge patrol officer's name in other places. Old rosters. Archived emails. Training materials. It appears briefly, then not at all. In one database, his name is replaced by an employee number that no longer links to a profile. In another, the entry simply reads unavailable. No reason given. The bridge remains active. It has to. It connects things that expect to be connected. During the day, it looks exactly the way it should. Sunlight flattens the water. Tour boats pass beneath without incident. Maintenance crews work quickly and leave before dusk. At night, The lighting cycles repeat as programmed. Red. White. Pause. The distance between the roadway and the water looks constant, measurable. Safe most nights. I spoke to someone who worked dispatch during the same period. Not officially, just a conversation that happened because I asked the wrong question in the right place. They told me there was a stretch of weeks where they hated covering the Bridge Patrol channel. Nothing ever happened on it, they said. That was the problem. The silence felt wrong, like waiting for a response that never came. They mentioned one call they still remember. A driver who stopped briefly at the midpoint and then called in, confused. Not scared, just unsure. The caller said the bridge felt closer to the water than usual, that the space beneath it felt compressed. Dispatch told them to keep moving. The call was cleared. No report filed. The maintenance ladder has not been replaced. Officially, this is because it was no longer needed. Unofficially, no one seems eager to reinstall it. Access beneath the bridge is limited now. Inspections are done from boats or during daylight. The underside remains mostly unobserved at night. The officer's final audio file remains archived, marked corrupted, not reviewed. The silence it contains is considered meaningless, too long to be useful, too empty to hold information. I know better now. Silence isn't empty. It's space, and space behaves differently depending on how long you give it your attention. Not real. Real. Not real. The phrase no longer feels like doubt. It feels like calibration, a way to keep distance, a way to remind yourself that seeing clearly is not the same as seeing safely. The bridge still teaches patience. It still rewards routine. Traffic slows at the midpoint whether drivers mean to or not. Just for a moment. Just long enough to notice the water below. Just long enough to feel the weight of the structure settle. The records never say what finally happened to the officer. They never say whether he fell, climbed, stepped, or was taken. They don't even say that something else was present. They only show where he stopped writing. The last thing in the system that still carries his handwriting is the blank page scanned from his notebook. No words. No marks. Just the faint impression of pressure where the pen rested, as if he had been holding it there for a long time. Waiting.